The purpose we're here today is to have a great panel discussion about elections and how you cover elections as broadcasters. I'd like to bring up our moderator for the panel and for the activity this afternoon, another Hall of Famer. He's going to be inducted next month into the Broadcast Pioneers Hall of Fame. And I can remember working with him at KYW, I want to say 100 years ago or something along that line. Let's welcome J. Lloyd, please.
And we have a panel. Let me tell you, we have a panel. Let me call up Dick Sheeran first. I don't know, age or beauty, what am I going by here? While Dick's on his way, Bill Baldini, please. Wonderful colleague from Channel 10. Larry Mendte, please join us. Larry. Dawn Stensland. Pleasure working with her at Channel 3 and KYW.
Doesn't matter.
Harry Hurley, joining us from the shore. Harry.
All right. How you doing?
I'm sick today. I'm all drugged.
And the guy who may have made my career or not, I don't know. A man who, when I took my first job in television at Channel 48 in Philadelphia, said to me, and as news director of Channel 3, why didn't you come to see me if you wanted to go in television? And I've always thought about that because I never knew where my career would have gone had I seen Al Primo first. Al, where are you?
There he is.
Right here, sitting in front of me. Politics have been heated lately, and so we might expect some heat today. And I want to ask one thing. Do not throw the crockery. The golf club needs it back when we're finished. I want to talk for just a second about a contrast in the way things were in covering politics when I came to Philadelphia in the 60s and the way they are now. I'm reminded of 1968 when you had a tremendous turmoil going on in the country, and yet candidates would come to Philadelphia, presidential candidates, there'd be ticker tape parades, people would line the streets by the thousands, and they'd be able to hear these candidates on the street. They'd stand on platforms at a central location near City Hall, make their speeches, and the public had a chance to hear them. Nobody was throwing crockery. Nobody was throwing anything but ticker tape. Now, at City Hall, you never knew where he was going to turn up around City Hall, was a cop named Tiny. As you can imagine, Tiny was not. Big, giant of a guy, he was a traffic cop. And one day he says to me, he says, hey, do you know Dick Sheeran? I said, sure, I know Dick Sheeran. I work with Dick Sheeran. And he tells me the story. He says, when Dick Sheeran was a kid selling daily newspapers on the street, and these parades would occur, Tiny would hoist Dick Sheeran on his shoulders so Dick could see the parade.
He can't do it now.
But you
have matched Tiny at this point.
You have covered so many elections.
Yes.
By my count, you must be at 80 anyway, 2 a year, something like that. Mm-hmm. What have you seen, remembering those days, and what we're looking at today?
Well, I think it's all electronic now. I can remember you were referring to these big rallies in Center City, Philadelphia. 15th and Chestnut, they'd pull up these flatbed trucks, and the candidate, I remember George McGovern that year, was campaigning. And there were 1,000 people, as far as you could see. And people did turn out for those. Now, everything, we reach people through electronics and, of course, more and more, the social media. That's changed dramatically the way people campaign and the way people get their information. I think we cannot discount and the internet and what's going on there. So it's changed dramatically in that sense, and it's kind of become less human, if you will. But that's really the way it's going. Just electronic now.
So what is the Bill? You've been out on the streets so long. I know I used to run into you constantly.
Yeah, I covered Lincoln.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah, which one? And we seem to have lost the tone of civility in politicking. And what's the media's responsibility? What do you feel the reporter's responsibility is when you're looking at some of the things that are going on now?
I'm glad you asked me that, because I have very strong feelings about that. When I began in the mid-'60s, I could remember the first thing that they would ask me when I did a story. The first, did you or did you not get the other side? If you did not, you better have an excellent explanation. It was unacceptable not to be fair. They used to tell you to leave your politics at the door. When you walk into that newsroom, you now become as objective as you can. Now they don't even ask you if you have the other side. If you didn't back in the old days, you didn't get on the air. Or you had to admit, I did not get the other side because, and it better be a damn good reason. That annoys me to no end. And the perception of the truth, most of the time, counts more than the truth. And the perception of the truth today is that the news media is liberal, very liberal. I don't care whether it is or it isn't. The perception bothers me to no end. Now, we're not talking about cable here. I'm talking about 3, 6, and 10, ABC, NBC, CBS. This is, to me, very troubling. I think it's troubling to the public, and generally, I'm upset. Does that answer your question?
Well, it might answer the question, but anybody want to dive in on...
I just want to add something as far as the local news is concerned. The tradition in Philadelphia is politics is not big news. Political stories are equivalent to a warehouse fire in Kensington. What you're talking about comes in is at the national level. I don't think you could pinpoint any local reporter and say, this guy's a liberal or this guy's a conservative. Politics just, maybe in Boston or Chicago, where Chicago has political, that's all they do. Those two towns are very much into politics, and the local media reflect it. But Philly, we never really got into it too deeply.
Larry had a look on your face when he said he equated to a fire in Kensington.
Because I think the warehouse fire in Kensington trumps politics in this town.
Yeah,
so
well, that's what I'm saying.
I think that's a lead. Politics is normally pretty low, and the only way it's covered in town is as a horse race, and that's also happening in much of the national media. Just talking about what Bill said a second ago, there was a recent poll that the number one thing that divides us now in the country is politics. It's no longer race, it's no longer sex, it's no longer the economic status, is no longer class, it is politics. And I think that the media is to blame, and I will push back just a little bit. I think that it was a long-standing policy among the three networks to have a bias. I think that built up over the years, even through the Cronkite years, into Rather. And I think what you saw with Fox News, which started this new trend in politics, was a reaction. What they thought was an equal and opposite reaction to what they considered a bias in the media. And that gave birth to MSNBC. At the time when it happened, I said, this is the most dangerous thing that's happening in the media, is that if you're going to take a point of view and have your own channel, where does that end? And I don't think we've seen the end of it yet, because Fox News was so successful. Now MSNBC is successful in going all liberal. and CNN is lost, they don't know where to go. They're going to go one way or the other pretty soon, just because you have to compete. And I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better, and it's the media that is causing that divide that I talked about.
You know, the question, Don, you spent some time with the local Fox station. To what extent do you feel that the corporate ideology filtered down to a local market where, quite frankly, you have a liberal bias in the public, your audience?
No. And I would tell people, I would be out reporting on any given story, and I would say, I don't know Bill O'Reilly. I have never met Bill O'Reilly. You know, and I think people locally do know the difference between the fact that there's the networks, which people do perceive are more liberal. But in general, as Bill's saying, if something happens on NBC 10 or whatever, and it has that spin, then people go, oh, see, the liberal media. So I think the local media then gets sort of sucked into as collateral damage to what the national media is doing. And I think the truth is that it's a laziness on the part of the national media. I mean, in other words, it's more exciting to just get reaction and to play a clip and go, ooh, Obama brought a knife to a gunfight. Did you see that? And then, ooh, and it's reactionary. And let's get the reaction from this and the spin from that. Instead of saying, which is what you did on the air this morning, let's read through the transcripts. Let's look at what Candy Crowley corrected and what everybody's debating, and let's read through the transcript of what was said. There's less of that going on locally and nationally than there is this gotcha and this ugliness. And I think that the media definitely is an incendiary device, especially nationally, with regard to this. And so the media is complicit in creating all the divisiveness instead of being, and let's just take it down, I'm a mom, okay? So let's just take it to our 8-year-old Michael. They had their little student council elections at the...
He's a liberal, by the way.
No, we were watching last night, actually. We were watching, and I said, what do you think? And he goes, well, I don't know who to vote for. They both look like very nice daddies. You know, he's like, if only everybody could be as sweet as... But I mean, the student council elections, imagine in your child's school, if the your child, however old, whether they're in grade school, high school, college, and they're saying, oh man, they're saying I'm a liar, I'm a killer, I'm a big fat idiot, I'm a dope, I've never been successful. Imagine your reaction as a parent. And that's what we're doing. That's what our politicians are doing, and we in the media are part of the problem.
Yeah, Harry, you know the reaction, that's what we hear about, and you get it all the time because you're a talk show host. To what extent do you feel that the bias of the audience influences what our talk show hosts today are doing on the air and how they're reacting?
I agree with so much of what's been said so far. I just want to echo some of that just by me tooing it. The concept of civility, and Jay, you're right, it's gone. It's never to be again, because you can't stuff the genie back in the bottle. I wrote a column about a month ago, and it was titled, When Did We Become Red and Blue States? And I think a lot of people don't remember, 30-some years ago, when this all started, they reverted the colors. Sometimes the Republican, I think Reagan was blue, okay? The Democrats were not blue, the Republicans were blue. And then they made it a point, networks wanted to be fair, like has come out here in the panel discussion so far. Now the bias, it's on steroids. They used to hide the bias. When Nixon won the presidency in '68, they said to each other in whispers, how did Nixon win? I don't know anyone who voted for him. Because everybody they hang around with voted for the other guy. What I hear all the time, people are tired of this blatant biasness. Look, let's just call it what it is. I was disgusted last night when Candy Crowley jumped into the debate. I thought she was doing actually an okay job, but a very important discussion of Libya, she decides to come in and start answering questions. It was outrageous. It's like the referee tripping you before you're going to cross the goal line. So people definitely, you know, these polls now, and I'm not even talking about the polls of the candidates, the media. Right now, there isn't a poll taken anywhere in America where 80% or more of America does not conclude that the media is biased. It's bad enough. but they also conclude they're biased for one side.
Right.
It's not just that they have a particular bias, hey, I really like this candidate this time, but then I'm biased for this one next time. It's all for one side. And now they don't even hide it. They're making contributions to their candidate of choice, and then they're cited in news stories as objective finders of fact that the other candidate's program doesn't wash, doesn't pay off.
Okay.
It's out of control.
Harry, Al, I'm going to ask you a question because you're in a very different position than any of us. You're management. How do you referee something like what's going on now, keep your reporters in line, keep your anchors focused? What is a manager's responsibility in all of this?
Well, I think that there's no doubt in my mind about the fact that, generally speaking, local television stations are fair and balanced. I think that there's more trouble on the network level than there is on the local level because, you know, when I was the news director at KYW-TV in Philadelphia 47 years ago, I might add, there was an incident that I'd like to share with you that happened 47 years ago that still has impact today. Down there on Walnut Street, where KYW used to be located, Woody Frazier was the producer of the Mike Douglas Show. And he had working for him a young kid by the name of Roger Ailes. And Mike Douglas used to, you know, way back then had the smarts, and Woody Frazier really had the smarts to bring in the kind of guests and so forth to help in the show. Excuse this. I'm so sorry about that.
That's Roger Ailes. He's amazing. He knows everything.
Anyhow, yeah, he does. He's been tracking me. But anyhow, so they book Richard Nixon to come in, and Woody Frazier, being the typical executive producer, big-time guy, didn't have enough time to spend with Nixon, so he says to this young man, Roger Ailes, take care of him, talk to him. And of course, that's when history was made, because Roger Ailes and Richard Nixon became fast friends, and Roger Ailes became the advisor to Nixon, and in the debate coached him and gave him things. And on that same particular incident, as the news director, we had a crew down there shooting the candidate coming in, and we were going to put it on the air that night. And Roger Ailes comes running up to my office and says, "You can't use that." I said, "What are you, crazy?" He said, "Well, the problem is that the Douglas Show was on tape, and they had to send the tapes around so that the show that they were doing that day with Nixon wasn't going to be on the air for 2 weeks." So anyhow, we were able, of course, to do that. But I just thought it was interesting that something that happened 47 years ago, Roger Ailes has become like this gigantic figure in journalism and is running the Fox network, and his whole background has been conservative, and he was smart enough to shape that whole network to the conservative point of view, and they, of course, are killing everybody in the ratings. Yeah. And that's my Philadelphia story.
Okay, you know what we see here. Bill's outraged. Harry's upset. You're a reporter. You're a moderator. You're in a political situation. You've got two or more candidates, or maybe one. And you're out there whether you're interviewing or whether you're controlling a debate. What happens when you know something is being said that is not correct?
That's not your job.
What do you suppress? Jump in.
But that's not your job. I mean, that's the whole thing. Even that's the other candidate's job. The other candidate's job to jump in and say that's not correct. Now, in the format last night, for example, President Obama waited until obviously his final statement to make the statement about the 47%, to give that little jab, knowing that Romney couldn't come back. So maybe that's a format issue. But I think in general, it's not. If you're the moderator and you're supposed to let their personalities come out and let the public see them, and that's not in the instructions, unless it is in the instructions, then you keep your trap shut and you do your job. You be professional.
Anybody else?
That's what makes a debate. I mean, I want to just add something. We're talking about bias, or, bias, of course, is always in the eye of the beholder. It depends on what side you're coming from. You want to pick out what you think is a biased thing. One of the other things that's always bothered me about media is whether or not the reporters and the editors and the producers are in touch with the people. In other words, when you work for a local station, and a lot of us who work in local television grew up in Philadelphia. I mean, I know where Broad and Susquehanna is. But the problem is, on the national level, I think a lot of the people in the news media are really quite out of touch with the rest of the country beyond New York and Washington and LA. There's a big country in between those two places. And I think the folks, particularly in the political arena, as far as the media is concerned, they kind of talk to one another. It's almost group think in many ways. And I think they're kind of out of touch with the public, if you will. And you can say, well, who's the average person? But generally speaking, they're out of, I perceive them to be out of touch. Not so much on the local scene, which I said before. I don't think you see a lot of bias in the local stations, but on the national level, they all kind of live in the same, Upper West Side or Upper East Side or Georgetown, and they just kind of.
And they're driven around in black cars with drivers. What? They're driven around in black cars with drivers, and they have makeup artists and stylists, and they're weighted on hand and foot, and they're treated like gods and goddesses. They don't go to the Home Depot. They don't know how much a gallon of milk costs. So they're not in touch with reality. They don't know what it is. They're not packing their kids' lunch and walking them up the road.
Yeah, I used to get a kick out of you'd have these reporters for the Inquirer, for example, who would come from out of town, some highfalutin journalism school, and they get an assignment to go into Kensington or Southwest Philly. It was like Margaret Mead going into Pango to this, figure out the natives, They didn't know, and
well, the good news,
that's a problem. It's a problem.
The good news is that most of the news programs seen on television are local. You're talking about a half-hour network broadcast on any station, and any station worth its salt now has a morning news before the Today Show or Good Morning America. They have a noon news. They have now a 4 o'clock, a 5 o'clock, a 6 o'clock, and an 11 o'clock, and a sign-off news. So most of the information that a community is getting is coming from the people in the community. And when I was here in Philadelphia at KYW as part of management, every month I had to file a community report, which meant that I had to go out to a church, a school, in a different part of the town, meet with the leader, and ask what was on his or her mind, and write that report. It was like a management requirement. It was a pain, but you really got a chance to know what was going on in your town. And I think that, as a consultant, sometimes when I go into a city and work with a station, the first thing I say is, look, you got to get your talent and your people out into the community. You got to televise the local parade. You got to do many, many things that just lock you into that community, and then you become the #1 news. Yeah. And it works every time.
Harry, you wanted to...
The Gang of 500 that thought they controlled the world suddenly has a threat. There's talk radio. 21 years ago, when I started, there was less than 100 people that did talk radio in the entire country. Now there's hundreds, thousands. The mainstream media does not have the grip that they had. Do you think it's a coincidence that there have been 3 debates, a presidential debate, vice presidential debate, and a second presidential debate, and that one side has had more time in each of those debates? I say it's not a coincidence when it happens 3 straight times. Is it a coincidence that Jim Layer is trashed, but Martha Raddatz and Candy Crowley are canonized and celebrated because the Gang of 500 want them to be involved? Dawn made a very good point. The role of the moderator isn't to be one of the participants. It's like a bad sporting event when the refs stink and everybody's talking about the refs. It's the worst job. The best job is when you don't even notice the moderator. You don't notice the referees. That's the difference. They applaud the fact that Raddatz ran interference in the vice presidential debate and that Candy Crawley ran interference in last night's debate. The difference now is they're being called out. They don't like it. This is why their bias, which has always been there, but they would pretend, you've all been around, they would say, oh, we're not biased, we call it just like it is, but they are biased. Now there's no surprise. It's wide open to see.
Years ago, we were talking about how things changed in covering politics. In the 60s, 70s, and probably the early 80s, the biggest event of the year were the elections. For the local stations, you were on from 6 o'clock to midnight, no matter what election it was, or whether it be for mayor or for the presidency. But Larry's right. Right now, it doesn't matter. Locally, elections don't matter. Locally, politics doesn't matter.
The ratings
doesn't matter
drop.
enough. Maybe I should put it that way.
That's why I kind of laughed also when I heard about all the newscasts on, because if you count the amount of news in those newscasts, it doesn't add up to a half hour. It's medical reports, consumer reports, it's features, it is fires, it's very little. There's really no investigative work being done anymore because it costs too much. There's really no fact-checking going on because there's no beat reporters, right. It doesn't happen anymore because it's either too expensive or they can't find the people to do it.
Let me throw out one for all of you, talking about beat reporters. I was very fortunate. I always had a beat, and so I could cover the politics within the framework of the territory and what I was involved with. But I've seen many, many reporters, and we've all been there at one time or another, where all of a sudden it's an election season, and you're out on the street, you're sent as a general reporter to cover a race or a candidate, or a debate, or something. You know absolutely nothing about each bit where you're sent, who the players are, or what the issues are. Well, what do you do? How did you deal with that?
That's the difference between the good reporters and the bad ones.
Okay,
the
well,
good ones
explain
figured it
what
out
the
right
good
away.
ones do.
One of the things you learn is that you have to be an instant expert every day. Every day you're going to want to do a story that you know nothing about, and before the day is over, for 2 minutes, you'll sound like an expert. You do find ways to research it. You may not do it perfectly, but the good reporters will do an adequate job.
I have to admit, I always liked election night. It's when we got free food in the station. Yeah, mostly pizza.
Pizza, yeah. It was always pizza.
Yeah, you had to love it, though. I mean, but you're absolutely right. Particularly in broadcasting, you're a general assignment reporter, and you have to quick learn whatever's thrown your way. You have to do a quick study and sound like you know what you're talking about, at least. But you're absolutely right.
Some of the fun is out of it now. One of the first major elections that I covered in the area was 1962, when Dilworth ran against Scranton for the governorship of Pennsylvania, and somebody asked Dilworth a question. Remember, he's a city boy. They asked him a question about Interstate 80, which is going to cross the northern part of the state, if it ever gets done. And he's a very flippant guy. He throws off a line. He says, there's nothing up there but trees and bears.
Yeah, only bears live there. That's what he said. He said only bears live there.
And every campaign stop he made after that, in the northern part of the state, there was this guy in a bear suit, just standing there, like that. Now, why haven't we seen at campaign stops Big Bird? There's no fun anymore.
There's actually going to be a Million Muppet March on November.
It is true.
Yeah. Honest to God truth. On November 3rd, there's going to be a Million Muppet March.
Okay.
And it's being sponsored by a guy that owns Animex Productions, who gets some funding from PBS for Sesame Street. So it's going to get coverage. Yeah, no, it's still there.
Yeah, but the reality is Big Bird is not a Muppet. Think about it.
No, Big Bird is part of the 1%, as Larry said. He's a billionaire.
Listen, I remember
doing better than anybody in this room.
We need Sesame Street and Big Bird to maybe help the economy.
I remember that Scranton election campaign, and I was at KDKA in Pittsburgh, and that station had the smarts, because it was a Pennsylvania governor, to send us, and I was a producer, and we had a reporter and a cameraman, and we got on the campaign plane, and we did a big tour. And I'll never get over the fact of how carefully orchestrated the campaign was, and the candidate and his wife and his kid were in manipulating us, the reporters. You know, they had the first class section was kind of there where they were, and the rest of us were in the back. But, like the wife would come out and, kind of hang out in the first or second row and chat up the various reporters. And before you know it, after 4 or 5 days, we're like, hey, this is our guy. So we went to the convention and we're like, go, and, we were supposedly objective reporters, and most of us were. But on that particular occasion, Goldwater just smashed him to smithereens at the convention, and everybody really felt like hell because they became so attached to the candidate. And I think, that's just part of the game that politics and elections are all about. You can't cover somebody every day and not become very close to the person. So you have the White House core very close to the Obama people, and then it's just part of the election and the American broadcast and journalistic policy. And you have to count on the integrity of the reporters to try to maintain some balance and some
and their own careers and their own success are tied to those candidates.
Yeah, they're part of the machine.
Because whoever is covering the winning candidate gets to be the correspondent for the network. So they're rooting for the guy.
We had the only memorable local debate I remember was between Thatcher Longstreth and Big Frank Rizzo. And at one point, you don't get colorful quotes like this anymore. And Frank turns to Thatcher and he says, "You're not going to win because nobody knows you, Fletcher." Fletcher.
But this goes back. That's a great story, and it goes to what Don was saying earlier about that final statement of Obama's last night. Whether it was by chance that he had that moment to get the last word, or he sat on that speech through an hour and a half waiting to unload it at that moment. But that was Rizzo's closing line.
Yeah.
He got the last word. Nothing else was going to happen after that, and he buried Longstreth.
He usually got the last word.
The truth of the matter is that presidential elections now are TV events.
Yeah.
That they actually do it better. They do media better than the media. Right. And so when you talk about manipulation, the manipulation now isn't of reporters as much. It is of the entire process. Yeah. And we allow that because it plays into the show.
The TV is all about running things. It's like ESPN tells the college athletic departments what time of the day they're playing and what day they're playing, and they listen. And the NFL. When the NFL puts its schedule out, it'll be TBA. To be announced, meaning whenever they can work out the better deal with the networks is when it's going to happen. So you got really television running the world, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's the reality.
I'm going to do something right now. Pardon me, Bill. I think we're still holding to 2:30 because there are a couple of people in the room, one or two that aren't retired yet. And they want to get back to an office. I see a couple of guys looking at their watches. But we know that there are questions building up out back here. I see Bobby coming out of his seat. I'd like to let anybody out there who has a question for the panel, a statement, a comment, again, no crockery. But Bob?
No crockery. The main question is about money. I mean, you can manipulate all you want, but every network, every local station, and we all felt it when the integrity went down, and I'm not going to be subtle, when the bean counters came in. I mean, I felt it as a cameraman. I couldn't do certain things anymore. It was the bean counters. Now, what we have today is our local television station. Do you see them fading out eventually because of cable being the entertainment, the political, the organizers of the country with their entertainment and their news?
I think there's always going to be a need and a desire for local news. I'm not certain if you need the buildings anymore. Yeah, I think that everything is going to slowly go and combine and go to the internet, and there's not going to be as much. I was going to say there's not going to be as much competition. There won't be as much competition between the networks. There will be more competition. Like for instance, Dawn just got a job at a low power TV station. Well, there's no such thing as low power TV stations anymore. Now everything's on cable. If you get a spot on cable or you get a great internet site, you can compete with anybody. You can do a TV show from your house as long as you get people that are going to watch you. And so yeah, I think there's going to be a desire. The content's still going to be there, and there's still going to be a need for local content. But I don't think that it's going to be from the same places that you traditionally have had it before in the past. And that's why, by the way, TV stations push their website so much, because everything's slowly going to the internet.
TV's not going away. TV is not going away.
But TV news as we know it has gone away.
No.
TV news that we knew from the 80s and 90s is gone.
Viewers want to come home and sit down on the couch and watch the news.
And watch AOL.
And they don't want to come home and, get on the keyboard and do all of that. AOL, I'll tell you something. I have AOL. And I got to tell you, when my homepage comes up, there's the worst array of weird stories and funky stuff.
Have you watched local news?
I mean, it's like, get away from me. This is outrageous.
Well, that was intended for your kids or your grandkids, not for you.
Okay.
Well, that's it. You're bringing up the demographic issue. Anybody under 29 is looking at the internet. They're not watching local news.
No, that's something we haven't.
Demographics.
Yeah, it's a generational thing. I mean, I've taught young people at Temple for the last 8 or 9 years, and they're not watching local TV news, folks. It's a generational thing. They're on their mobiles, they're on the internet, et cetera. And one thing we haven't pointed out is that in this age of the internet and social media, everybody's a reporter. We don't have the monopoly we used to have on the news and the message. People, like somebody just said, you could sit in your bedroom and broadcast to the world. So that it's changed dramatically in that sense.
Here, I'll give you an example from last night. In New York, I had to analyze the debate last night. And so I had Twitter up to find out what everybody was saying. On my iPad, I had AOL because they had a live feed of the debate, and I was watching CNN. So that when I walked around, I could watch AOL and still see the debate, but I also wanted to get instant reaction from Paul Begala, from Chuck Todd, from politicians, from Rob Portman, and there it was, a stream of instant reaction to everything everybody was saying. And so I agree with you, TV's not going away, but it's going to be defined differently. It will not be what we think of television now.
Yeah.
Bill Wright, please.
It's really good to see you again after all these
Thanks.
years. I just wondered, I missed the announcement, which liberal puppet will moderate the third grade?
Bob Schieffer.
Yeah, Bob Schieffer.
Oh, he'll be good.
And it'll be the same setup as the first debate.
Ed?
Yeah, if the panel, try to picture yourself as a news director at either a local or a national television station, given the fact that you need to capture eyeballs, you need to differentiate yourself from the competition, and you want to make a pot of gold for the owners of the organization, how would you change things?
I would do exactly what Channel 6 does. That's why they've been #1 forever. I would do exactly, the irony is that the bean counters at all the other stations are always changing up everything, changing the product, changing the look of the product, changing the on-air talent, changing around the photographers, the way the video is shot. There's one station in Philadelphia that said, you know what, we're going to make a commitment to the community, we're going to be consistent, we're going to have the same people. if anybody survives, as Larry has pointed, as many of you have pointed out, there might only be one TV news station, just like we used to have a lot of newspapers, and now we really have one or two of record. So I think that's the answer. I think, and I don't know that that's what you think is the best quality, but I think that's the truth in Philadelphia.
That only works for local news.
Right.
Isn't that your question, though?
Okay,
I thought it was local.
Let's go here
I'm sorry.
first.
How would you change things on a national level, since there's all this criticism? How would you change it?
You got to do the same thing on the national level as you do on the local level. And that is that you hire the best people. You have you take NBC, and I was just saying this at the table before. In January, I said, the Today Show, goodbye. Why? They go and they put Savannah Guthrie on. You take one look at Savannah Guthrie, she's not got the same qualities as Meredith Vieira or Katie. They're making the wrong decisions with these people. Now, Savannah Guthrie got the job because, she was the White House correspondent and ABC was romancing her and so forth. And so they make those kinds of decisions. And Chuck Todd, the guy that's in Washington, I mean, you can hear the clicks when he comes on. What do you put a guy like that on for?
He's an expert, though. I have to say, I love Chuck Todd. He actually lives and breathes it, and he really knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, but he doesn't have the basic communication skills necessary.
But I think
he's not
he keeps
Jim
it
Gardner.
Real. See, I disagree on the national level. I actually think that people who keep it real and are just real people, I think that's what we need. And I actually think for younger people in that younger demographic, I actually think they can look past that more.
The way it has to work is you got to be able to have both. You have to be telegenic, you have to be smart, you have to be educated, you have to have all the things that make what we call stars. That's what it's all about. You can't have one or the other. You can't, you got to have it all. And the network has to have that. Look at Good Morning America and look at ABC. All of a sudden, they're just like this. They got it.
Let's come over here for a question.
Do any of you folks remember a movie called State of the Union?
Yeah.
A Frank Capra movie?
Yeah,
It's a great
really.
movie that's going to be shown tonight at the Bryn Mawr Film Institute. It's worth seeing. It's got Tracy and Hepburn. It's got Van Johnson stealing scenes from them. And Tracy is running for president in the 1940s.
Oh, I've seen it. It's a wonderful movie.
President Truman was a premier of this movie in 1948 with his daughter Margaret. The Trumans are mentioned 5 or 6 times in the movie, and the description by Frank Capra was that Truman was bouncing up and down in his chair every time his name came to the screen. It's really worth seeing. It's a wonderful movie.
Fabulous.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
Well, I want to thank y'all. Y'all.
Well, listen, we can't leave on a negative note. I mean, thank you so much. But also, look, I disagree with the fact that, it's all going downhill. I think that journalism and free speech, it's America. We are Americans. And I believe that what's happening is this incredible energy. And the young people like your son are demanding quality and specific products and more niche. So maybe there'll be politics and maybe there'll be health news and that sort of thing. So I actually believe it will get better, but it is the death of television news as we know it. But that doesn't mean that television news in a quality form will not be born or reborn, however you want to say. So I think we can't, I don't want to leave it on a negative note that, it's all bad and this and that. I actually am such an optimist that I feel that the product will be amazing. It's just we're watching the rebirth, and much like labor, it's kind of ugly right now. But I do believe that it will survive because it's American.
And there's the last word.
Great comment. Absolutely true.